Greetings, brothers and sisters. One of the great sayings in the heartfulness system is that human beings make plans and God laughs. Because human plans are, for the most part, desired-based, based in egotistical desires. It's happened in my life where I had goals, where I had a plan, and the plan was correct, or at least I was going in the right direction for the wrong reasons, right? The reason that I thought I was going in a certain direction and had certain goals changed, and I had to adapt. I had to accept that I didn't see the thing correctly, or maybe I needed, just based on where I was before, I needed to believe something to go in one direction to ultimately realize that there was another reason that I was going in that direction. So an example of this was, my family and I years ago, me personally and my family, had embarked on a research project of living in a homestead environment, living on a homestead doing farming things, and also gathering information about what I present here, truther narratives and things like this, right? And there was other things, I worked as a clinician during this period of time, a counselor with sex offenders, and there was other things that, information that I was gathering, personal information I was gathering. And I had thought at that time, in the beginning of it and later on, that this information, this research project, was being done for other people in the heartfulness system. And, my family was going to live an intergenerational family farm. And so these two ideas were always there as a catalyst for doing this work. That someday we were going to live in a sort of a gurukulam, which is a school that has a farm and other things around it, right? It's kind of a neat thing. Educational environment. The idea that there would be like some sort of an ashram or spiritual center at the, farming type community, and there would be various families and people there that would, like-minded people that did the heartfulness system, people that were, already in the system, I thought would be, ideal. And people would raise their kids there, and there would be a place for, there'd be a farm, but there'd also be, things for arts and building and all these various, life skills the kids would get. They would, learn, they would have a higher level education, but also learn to milk cows. And, there would be this community, and the center of the community would be some sort of meditation center or ashram that would have a good spiritual condition. And we'd all be able to meditate. And, the heartfulness system with its transmission, it just creates an atmosphere and an environment, and especially at a meditation hall where everyone's meditating. And that would, those vibrations, that energy would permeate the area, and it would just be this, wonderful place for kids to grow up and develop and families to be and things like this. So there was this sort of goal of some sort of gurukulam, at least this information, this research project that we were conducting. The information would be brought back to the organization that I love and am a part of, right? But it didn't go that way. Like everything fell apart in 2013 and 14 for me and my family. There was, a divorce, and the kids didn't really want anything to do with farming because they wanted to get into, and we were in India, and they wanted to get into, various types of normal life, right? Video games and technology and cell phones and social media and things like this, because it was something they didn't have, and they saw all these other kids doing this. It was what they considered normal life, and it is, normal life now. And probably the worst part was that the information that I had, this experience my family and I had shared, there was no real interest in it. There was a few people, maybe 5% people of the people I talked to in terms of the heartfulness system practitioners, and then people who are leaders in the heartfulness system. They wanted no part of this, and they were almost sort of against it and didn't understand it. Certainly the truther things, the things to do with, truth, even though I was pursuing teachings, I was doing research on teachings from the Whispers from the Brighter World books and things, which I've talked about before. And so it was a bitter disappointment, and it was a harsh reality of going through the divorce, which ultimately was just a complete blessing for me, and having to reinvent my family, and big changes were happening. But the most bitter pill that there was to swallow was that I, firmly believed at the time and still believe that God had set me down this path. And then just to slam the door in my face, right? I clearly was following my, in terms of my heart and my, doing this heartfulness system. And I was following the path that God laid down in front of me. And just to have the door slammed in my face and just, having had a series of failures and disappointments on the homestead and just all this frustration and things, which had a lot to do with the marital situation and, mental illness and things that were happening there. And so this door slammed in my face, but another door opened, which was this YouTube channel. And then there was all of a sudden a large audience of people that wanted to hear information from this research project that I had gone through. And so there was a reason for it. God had led me to this path. But my original reasons and the way I thought it was going to go, it didn't go that way. And people all need to sort of realize these things happen all the time, where you might have an original reason to go and pursue something, but plans change, or sometimes you don't really have it specifically right. Your motivation is one thing to start something. And sometimes the spiritual part of you, or God, has to trick your ego into doing something because the real reason you're doing it wouldn't be something you would, necessarily want to do. You wouldn't do all the work that you're doing. You wouldn't pursue something for the real reason. And so you have to be able to adapt and adjust and be mature and accept things, right? Accept that things are going to change and you're going to grow, and your ability to perceive things, if you're on an evolutionary path, should be getting better. Your ability to understand the ways of God and reality and just all of it and yourself should be getting better as you mature and get older. Most people, that isn't the case. They just lock in and their personalities are locked in, and they just don't really learn anything. They just waste their lives usually going in the wrong direction. Which brings me to the Cubies and trust the plan, right? Because most of you who are watching this understand, I'm not talking about the Cubies, but most of you regular viewers understand that the Q movement was something based completely on deception. It was not a real movement, right? In terms of Q wasn't who he said he was, it was a false movement based in a false leader. And what most of you probably already know, that Cubies actually were working for what they call the deep state. Their work, what they ended up doing, contributed to what they call the deep state. And they were an asset for the so-called deep state on so many levels. They just hurt all of us in the truth community. They were a complete drag to be around, and they caused more censorship and more movement for the agenda that they were so much against. They were literally working for their enemies, and they were completely arrogant and obstinate and pig-headed about it. And they just wouldn't wake up even after one failure after another. I mean, think about what's happening now, and they just rearrange reality and come up with some sort of fantasy every major time they're wrong, which is basically all the time. The Q's wrong and the movement's wrong, and it backfires. No sealed indictments. That was the beginning of it, right? No sealed indictments. A number of my viewers sent me a video of Alex Jones going off on the Cubies and saying that he wasn't going to suffer them anymore, how they're always wrong and how they always somehow mentally justify it. And I realized that the Cubies were too crazy for Alex Jones. Right? The Cubies were too crazy for Alex Jones. Even though Alex Jones was one of the original, he was a Cubie in the beginning. So I don't know exactly when it was. The beginning of 2018, I had heard about Q stuff, just barely. And it's something, I guess it began in 2017. And I looked at YouTube trending videos. And there was a woman there, April something, and she made a video about Q, and it was just ridiculous. And there was never any truther videos that were shared on YouTube Trends. And then in January of 2018, YouTube shared this one video by this woman, and another one by Alex Jones came up like a day later. And they never trended Alex Jones videos. It was bizarre. And so I was like, what is this QAnon thing? And so I went and I looked into it. And I couldn't believe how stupid it was. There was three factors, like within the first, I don't know, few minutes of doing research in it, in terms of the official story behind this QAnon movement, that were major red flags, and I could see it was some sort of psychological operation. The first one was that the official story is that there is this person or entity that's Q, is a person who has Q level security clearance in the government, the highest level of security clearance, and this person is divulging information on the internets to right-wing, audience, and he's claiming that he and a bunch of people that work within the government who have this highest level clearance are working against the bad guys called the deep state. And the good guys were going to use the surveillance system, this very offensive and very, wrong and immoral and really illegal spying system, spying network that the government is using to spy on all of us. And that these good guys were going to use this against their enemies, and somehow the spying network was a good thing, which is just ridiculous. Just to break this down, there were four major flaws, just fatal flaws in this story. Unbelievable things that couldn't happen. Number one, if somebody who had Q clearance started to leak things on the internet, they would be immediately caught because of the spy network that they talked about, right? The spy network that is even more aggressive and is most focused on people with power and clearance. They're always worried that somebody who has clearance is going to have a meltdown or, gain a conscience or something like this and rat out information or sell information to the enemies of the American government and the system because it's very valuable. And so they scrutinize all these people with high-level clearance, and they're spied upon more than anybody else, right? They are owned. So this initial premise of whatever the QAnon movement, the Q person is, the entity that is Q, is completely false. It can't exist in reality. It's a huge BS plot hole, even in a bad B-level sort of, spy movie. It just wouldn't exist. It doesn't exist in reality. It can't happen. And what's funny about it is that the narrative, the initial narrative, the foundation of the narrative is that the spy network, they acknowledge that there is this surveillance network as being one of the primary tools of this movement. And they're acknowledging the very network that makes this thing impossible, right? So just think about that. That's number one, how ridiculous it is. Number two, they're announcing their plans right on the internet for everyone to see. And so what they were basically saying, the Q movement was saying, is they needed a bunch of dumb, untrained, gullible, easily manipulated people who don't really have much power to contribute to taking down the deep state, who is filled with trained, professional, covert operators and military personnel, and that they were going to announce their plans on the internet to the untrained civilians, which meant that the trained people, the people in the deep state, the people who had more power and money, were also aware of their plans. It's just so stupid. Trump was asked, he said he had a plan to take down ISIS, and people asked him to tell him his plan when he was running against Hillary Clinton. And he said, that's stupid. Why would I tell you? If I tell you my plan, they're going to hear about my plan. I mean, even Trump got this basic premise. I mean, Trump's no rocket scientist, but what he said here was, really smart. And that the fact that this QAnon person was announcing their plan and saying they were taking down the deep state and that they were making it public, they're announcing their plan to the deep state. Like, just so stupid. Like, it just, these were major red flags. Each one of these things made this movement, this person, have no credibility. The third thing was that the person was anonymous. So the anonymous part made it so you couldn't verify that this person was who they said they were, or they were working for who they said they were in terms of their Q level security clearance, and you didn't know anything about the person. You couldn't read their body language or hear their voice or have any sort of human-to-human contact with them to assess their legitimacy, because you were able to read people and see if you believe them or not. There was none of that. And the person, if they were what they said they were, they could be killed at any time and taken over by the enemy, because you'd have no way of knowing. Like, you'd have no way of knowing that this was the same person. And so the anonymity part of this thing was another red flag, that it couldn't work. I mean, it's just something where the person who would be leaking this information, if they were sincere, they would be caught by the government, because, you know, they have Q level clearance, and the government has contingency plans for someone doing something stupid like leaking information. I mean, that's people who might sell secrets to some foreign government or power, but someone who sets up on 4chan or 8chan, right, and announces that they're doing this, then they would start looking for that person and find them within a day or so, and that thing would be shut down. So that's like a red flag. Announcing their plans in public was another red flag, and then the anonymity part. And maybe the biggest red flag is that the information that was being leaked was exactly what people who are very extreme right-wing people wanted to hear. Like, it was just tailored to them. It was tailored to their personality and their belief system. Whenever you get the truth, like I was talking about in the beginning of this video, when you get the cold, hard truth of something, it always stings a little bit. Like, some of the truth agrees with your belief system. Some of the truth aligns with how you feel or judge something. But some of the truth doesn't, and it always has to make you grow and change. Whenever you get truth, it has to confront something in you that you have to let go of and evolve from, and realize that you didn't see the whole picture. But when somebody presents the truth to you, like a salesman would, like Trump did, and like Q did, pandering to the belief system, saying that everything you believe is right, and giving you more confirmation bias, and not presenting any information that's going to make you want to change and really wake you up, then it's not a movement, it's a sales job. You're being sold something. And it was clear to me, because I saw all these flaws in the right wing, the extreme right wing, that sort of became, truthers in a dishonest way, because they're not having to change and grow. Like, there's been periods where I've woken up to something, especially in the beginning, that were a shock to my system. It took a while for me to even, can this be true? And you're in a sort of shock state that everything that you've believed is wrong. Like, everything that you've been told is off in some way. I mean, many of you have experienced this. But people who came in with the Q movement already believed all the things that Q was saying, and it just was, more intense. It was like the stuff that they believed, but now it was on steroids. And they had somebody who they believed was a powerful person with Q-level clearance that was working high up in the government. And also Donald Trump was their savior. And JFK Jr. was somehow not dead, and they were all working together, and they were validating the beliefs. These powerful people were all validating the beliefs of the Cubies. And they weren't confronting their own limitations. They weren't growing and changing, because the enemies of the QAnon movement are people like Soros and like Hillary Clinton, that these right-wingers already hate and demonize, and there is no place for the left-right paradigm, which is one of the foundational building blocks of the truth community, that both sides have to be owned. There isn't one deep state that's a liberal deep state and a democratic deep state. It's got to be all a deep state or not at all a deep state, right? It's either one or the other. It's not, half of it's a deep state. And the half that you have been enemies against and don't like forever. And so Q only told half the story. Like when they talked about Jeffrey Epstein, they talked about how the Clintons were Jeffrey Epstein's friend, but they left out how Trump literally said he was good friends with Jeffrey Epstein, and that Jeffrey Epstein liked young girls. Like, Trump said that, but they somehow wash over all those things and believe only that the left is bad and the left is wrong. So the movement was so easily detected as complete BS, right? It was just anybody with any sense of, consciousness and critical thinking skills and abstract thought could see that all these things were just ridiculous and remedial, and you had to be really asleep and kind of stupid to fall for it and believe it. But it was the behaviors of the Cubies that was the real problem. Because when I first heard about this, I made, a video talking about all these things I just talked about. And then I let it go and move on. I didn't care about it. You can't fight battles on every possible side. You can't, go against Hollywood and various levels of the government and the mainstream culture, and then also fight battles with other truthers. And, there's ways that the truth community has been divided by conflict and personality conflicts and all these things. And I've stayed away from that because, it's just ends up being more division and more, conflict and all these things. In fact, I don't really even fight battles. I stay calm. I don't get emotional, and I just present the information here in the most positive way, and I offer a spiritual solution, not my solution, but in terms of the method of the heartfulness system that has benefited me and is to me the solution to these problems, all the problems that we're seeing of a depraved, debauched system, a beastly system. And so, like I said, I didn't care about the Q movement, didn't think about it. I just thought it was stupid and whatever. But then it was the behaviors of the Cubies themselves that were causing censorship on YouTube and other platforms. They were harassing real truthers, people who were doing real work. I mean, that was the major one. They were causing conflict and division. They came in like know-it-alls, right? Like they knew everything. And they were newbies. Like they weren't even really truthers. They hadn't even really woken up, but they were announcing reality to me, and other people had been around for a while. And we could see them like they looked like children, right? Like, just badly behaved children having tantrums. They would accuse you of being a shill or say that you were a pedo enabler or something like that when you disagreed with them. And their ridiculous worldview that didn't exist in reality in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes when you have conflict with somebody, they're kind of right and you're kind of right and you both have valid points. But when you had conflict with Cubies, it was just this complete immature mental illness tantrum on one side. And you're just like, how can I deal with you when you're just so far gone? And so many people had been harassed. And it was also the harassment and the gang stalking, because some of my viewers said they had seen videos from Cubies who trained other Cubies on how to gang stalk and harass and bully other people in the truth community that disagreed with them. And I saw one video of a Christian former Cubie who woke up to the stupidity of the Cubie movement, and he said he just didn't believe in it after, countless times of Q being wrong and the Cubie movement. I mean, there was the original 5,000 or whatever it was, 10,000 sealed indictments that were out there, and they found them, and they just knew it was, it was valid in one way or another. And like he said, finally he realized that it was BS, and he was talking to one of his QB friends. He said, I just can't believe this anymore. And the guy completely turned on him and outed him in the Q community, and they all gang stalked and harassed him. And he said the guy had been to his house, and they were like friends before the Q stuff. And he couldn't believe, and they were like Christians, and like, maybe went to the same church or something. It was like something like that. I can't remember the specifics. I mean, but they were cannibals. Like anybody who turns against the cult and this ridiculous movement, they were, they cannibalized. And then Trump was a part of it, and Trump fed into it. It made Trump stuff ridiculous. And it became something that they used, the so-called, what Q's call the deep state, what we call, the government and the powers that be, and the media started to use all these Cubies as a way to censor the rest of us and to clamp down on a lot of these truthful narratives. And the Qs were locked in there like they were a part of what we were doing when they clearly weren't. And so they were used as a weapon, and certainly all the way up until what we just saw now at Capitol Hill, where it's having real-life effects in your civil liberties and rights. And the Q movement is the centerpiece to their offensive behaviors. The so-called deep state's offensive behaviors is based in Q stupidity, QB's stupidity. So it's had real disastrous effects for all of us. And I, believe that God has a plan and the system has to be taken down. So I take these things with a grain of salt. But I can say dealing with Cubies is unbelievably frustrating. And so many of us have experienced this, and it just sucks. That people in the truth community dislike Cubies more than anybody else because we have to deal with them all the time. So many people have stories of being harassed and bullied by Cubies and just how it's a complete drag, how we all feel about you. If you're a Cubie, how everyone else feels about you. And in fact, you guys don't even like each other. You're difficult to deal with, even in your own movement. And another way they've done damage is, and I noticed this when the first, Tom Hanks said he had COVID, and then there was, I made a few videos about this, and I had all these Cubies showing up and saying, no, you're wrong. You don't get it. He's locked up in Gitmo. Like, remember I made all these Gitmo videos mocking the Cubies. And the problem was, like, I was making legitimate videos with, valid points. And some of it was speculative. And I point out when I'm being speculative. And I always state the official story and things like this. So people have a sense of all of it, right? But Cubies came in and just started making up and sensationalizing all of these stories about this fantasy that all these celebrities were being locked up and the indictments were coming in. And those were the kind of videos that would get all of the run and the play because whatever was the most sensationalistic narrative would just pull people to it. And it would just like kill all these other valid ideas and points about what's going on. So they literally were parasiting because me and other people have built this movement, right? We've created this genre of videos and, this content that's out there on the internet. And these Cubies came in and hijacked all of this work, like legitimate research that people had done. And, we might be wrong, but we're not. I mean, we're not batshit crazy with these Cubies come in with these ridiculous theories that just wreck everything, right? They just delegitimize the whole movement. And there's now probably more Cubies out there in the so-called truth community that are just a cancer on all of us, right? I mean, I've seen it grow and metastasize, right? Just a malignant element, and it outnumbers now legitimate people who are searching for the truth and have critical thinking skills, and they're just doing damage at every turn. And as I've said before, what separates us from the so-called controllers, if you want to think that you're better than the people that control the system, then you can't behave like them. You can't be a bully and do all these things where you're aggressively pursuing other people. Anybody who disagrees with you, you attack them. You flag their videos and you don't allow people to have other opinions than yours. As soon as somebody disagrees with you, you have to say something. You have to be hostile and crappy about it. One of the big ones is that you have to be able to admit you're wrong. Like, if the truth is there and you're denying the truth because you don't want to face that you've been duped and you've been played and you've been worked by the system that you're against, by the deep state that you're so against, that the deep state's been playing you, right? And you don't want to admit that you've been completely fooled and you're following this great pumpkin. Let me put that great pumpkin clip in here. I made the great pumpkin clip that's so sums up the Cubie mentality.
Dear Great Pumpkin, I'm looking forward to your arrival on Halloween night.
So first he takes a hit off the hopium pipe.
Pumpkin patch, and you'll see the Great Pumpkin with your own eyes.
And then he tries to get his bitch hooked on hopium.
Sitting in a pumpkin patch with a blockhead. You owe me restitution!
Then his bitch realizes she's in love with a hopium addict and she wants her Skittles. She's been cheated out of her Skittles. And now his sister, who sees that her hopium addict's brother is strung out on hopium, has to go and retrieve him from the pumpkin patch.
I did a lot of stupid things in my life, too.
Stupid? What do you mean, stupid?
You sat in a pumpkin patch all night long waiting for a pumpkin man to rescue you. It's high on hopium, and he never came. That's what we mean by stupid.
Just wait till next year, Charlie Brown. You'll see. Next year at this same time, I'll find a pumpkin patch that is real sincere.
But after all the evidence has been presented that the great pumpkin doesn't exist, it's not going to save you, still in denial, lashing out, angry, waiting for the next hit off the hopium pipe. And so, the controllers know that they're going against God. They know that they're, trying to preserve a system that should have collapsed years ago. And the Cubies are very similar when they get the news that Q is a fraud and Trump isn't the savior that they thought he was. They just deny it and attack. Now that Trump is out of office, that he has, done this walk of shame, the way he left the office the last months, and Biden is in, that should be over, right? But it won't be. But it's got to be over for the rest of us. We just, the Cubies just have to go. Like, this is it. Like, you've had enough chances. You've had enough opportunities to realize you got played and worked, and that you're, just a newbie in this. You should be sitting back and listening. You're in the phase where you should be learning instead of trying to teach. You think you're teachers, but you're not even students yet. You're not even good students yet. First, you have to sit back and observe and learn some things and expand your consciousness and grab some more IQ points somehow or whatever it is, and figure out that you have to actually adapt and change your belief system and whatever that is, and have to rise up to a higher level of consciousness instead of trying to teach people who are far above you in their ability to decipher reality and see what's going on. So this thing is the death knell to the QB movement, because Trump leaving office and Biden's being sworn in and all these things that they've been saying are going to happen over and over again, these fantasies that never come true. It's time, right? This is the end of the QB movement one way or another. It has to die. Like, it's just your last opportunity to realize you got played and worked, and that you've been doing damage to the so-called truth community or the truth movement. You've been hurting the truth, and you've been helping the deep state, what you call the deep state. I mean, this is, your last opportunity to realize this and change your ways, because it's, it's game time, right? Things are getting real out there, and we can no longer afford to have this cancer in our midst, right? When you're a godly person, you have to be able to adapt and change. One of the biggest things here, and I'm going to put this out there more and more in my videos, that you have to change. Like, I have to change and you have to change. We have to get better. If the, evil doers get worse, we have to get better. Like, we can't be focused on how bad the so-called elite are and not be changing ourselves, and certainly embrace their behaviors and do the things the way the elite is doing them. Then what's the difference, right? I've said this over and over again. When people say they're unsubscribing, they're trying to censor you. They want to, shut you up. And when they attack your, whatever it is, your content, and criticize you, that's just ways of people trying to shut you up, right? That's ways of people trying to make you adapt their point of view, harass and shame you and bully you and threaten you or whatever it might be, into adapting their worldview. And if you're like that, you're no better than the controllers. Work on yourself. Like, why bother focusing on them when you're such an asshole? I mean, just, this is your wake-up call. This is your, January 20th wake-up call. And again, Cubies failed. Q hasn't delivered. It's just all BS. And just, at some point, you got to realize the great pumpkin has just been frog marched out of the White House. He ain't coming to save you and Q and all this. And you got played and rolled. And now you have to, just reinvent yourself. And the best way is to listen. Stop talking and listen. Step back and just observe and see. They try to reach up to a higher level of existence, because only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.